Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a first submission by Karen of her horse Cisco. Cisco is an off-the-track thoroughbred. Not sure how long she's had the horse, but we're getting some good things going here, beginning to happen on the lunge line. So let's talk about it a little bit here. You do get the horse to stretch pretty well here on the lunge line when you get there. Takes them a little time, but that's always the case. But at least this horse looks pretty calm and that he's just not charging around you and that sort of thing. The biggest thing you got to do in the lunge lines now is begin to get the horse to yield its hindquarters away from you. Now this is where I were there, I'd work the horse in hand and get it stretching more for you in hand and then go back to the lunge line work, which helps a great deal with thoroughbreds. Now we can see that this horse is very undeveloped. If we look at it as it comes around silhouette there, we can see that there's a pretty good sized dip behind the saddle there coming up to the top of the hindquarters there of the croup. And we can see the horse is kind of underdeveloped. You can see the underside of the neck is pretty well developed. It gets there for a few minutes here in the lunge line, and that's about the only time. But that's okay if you get it there for a moment, but it won't be long before you'll be able to get it there and keep it there consistently. So that's a step in the right direction. So what you keep wanting to do, if you notice how you're lunging here, this horse is always on two circles. That is, his forehand is way outside the circle of his hindquarters. So remember that the shoulder in is the basic exercise that we do to get the horse to, or leg yield, to get the horse to step under and lift its back up. So if you don't push the hindquarters away from you, that's never going to happen. The horse is kind of evading that by pulling its shoulders way to the outside. And as you see, you're way too far behind the horse right here when you're lunging. So I'd like to see you get a little closer to the horse, and the biggest thing you have to work on here is getting those hindquarters to move out away from you. Now, I would highly recommend that you try to go and watch the videos on our site about work in hand, because that would be the most helpful thing that you could do for this horse right now. And we can see how his belly is quite dropped there, and the back is dropped behind the saddle. So this horse is pretty has been sinking for a while in his back there, which is typical of horses that haven't been ridden over their backs. Now, however, do remember that you can get a horse from the racetrack that's been trained by somebody who knows what they're doing at the racetrack, and they work and run over their back. So this applies to all disciplines of horsemanship. So once again, there in your walk work, you just needed to get the horse, keep working on to get the horse to push the hindquarters away from you. You can see even here, you just want to ask the horse to be much more active and get it to swing those hindquarters out away from you. Gets a little better there. And you do start to get a pretty good stretch here. And once again, look at the horse's back as we come around in silhouette there. Now that's really getting quite good there and much more like you want. Just needs a little more active swing, and if you would just actively push the hindquarters a little more away from you, you'd probably get that little more swing that you want. But the stretch is beginning to happen here, so the right things are happening. Now, the other issue that I see here, having watched this whole videotape, my advice to you would be not to ride this horse for a while, because you're not really getting the horse anywhere near where it needs to be in the mounted work. So really, you're just kind of going around the horse's hollow. I mean, you're not interfering with his front end, but he's not really getting there into the stretch, which is kind of like you're driving the car without shock absorbers, and there isn't a lot of point in that once you realize how much damage it does to horses' legs and bodies to be ridden in that way. Now, you're not trying to force the horse's frame into anything, but you just get my point. So what you need to do is just come back here to the lunge work and ground work and get that really good and really consistent in the stretch, which you never really get to. I mean, I'm talking about this horse should get to the point where it stretches down and stays there for 10 circles at a time, or until you ask it to change. And then you'll find you'll get on, and this whole thing of riding it into the stretch will just be much easier. Because if you don't have much skill in terms of, it's one thing for me to get on a horse who's been doing this for 50 years and somebody who's just trying to learn it. So it will be much easier for you and the horse if you get all this done before you get on the back of the horse. That is, you get it stretching more consistently, you get it strengthening its back as you're doing here. This work is starting to look pretty good. Though it still needs to swing a little bit more, and it's still that episode that you're just getting too far behind the horse. Remember that you want to stay at this top of a triangle formed by your rein and your whip, and you see you're kind of behind that triangle, so to speak. So you need to get the horse a little closer to you, and you'll see the same thing is happening. He's just pulling his hindquarters way outside the circle on you, so he's not really going around. But he would. I feel like this horse is ready to get there if you just had worked it a little bit harder and just pushed for a little more to get those hindquarters out away from you. When we lunge, and if he gets a little excited about that, when you ask that, don't worry about that. Just bring him right back down and ask him to soften and quiet again. Because we do have to ask them for a little bit more. In this case, just to swing the hindquarters outside. Now, we're still seeing the same kind of thing here in the walk. the horse is never really stretching into it in the walk, though it does get better when you trot. So just the fact that you've got a little more activity is helping him to get there, and I don't think you're far from it. I mean, this horse is having moments where he's stretching really well, like right there, and that's exactly what you want. But you see how small the little steps are behind. So from here, you've got to get once again, to push the hindquarters out away from you a little bit more and ask him to engage a little more actively forward under the body. Remember, when we talk about horses being forward, that's what we mean, that they are engaging forward under the body, not that they're running fast. One of the biggest misconceptions in dressage today is what forward means. It does not mean to run as fast as you can around the arena. Because there is a speed. If you go past a certain point, the horse will simply, the inertia, the mass of the horse will drive it onto his forehand. So we only want to go just fast enough to get the horse swinging and active behind, but not faster than that. But faster than what you're going here. It's just a little too slow. And every time you do send him on a little bit, we get a good stretch. But once again, look how short the step is behind. It's got to be much more active than that. But you're on your way. Once again, if you can get that little bit that you're getting there, that's what you want to build on. And look how much nicer his neck looks. He begins to soften that underside of the neck. But once again, see how far behind the horse you are lunging. You need to work a little closer to him, take bigger steps, but you've got to get him to push those hindquarters out away from you. Once again, you see how he's just swinging his shoulders to the outside. And that's why your stretch is not kind of as consistent. I think if you could get a little more contact, that is, shorten your line a little bit. You don't want to have slack in your line. You don't want to have pull in the line either. Just like when we ride, we want it to be the weight of the rein between us and the horse. But still very small steps here. And once again, that's how you would correct that, is by just getting after the horse a little more and asking him to move those hindquarters, which means you've got to be good enough with that whip to run the lash out and touch the horse on the hindquarters with it, so it will yield away. And always remember that that's the most basic element of control. Just as in nature, you see horses in pastures, how they come up. If one wants to threaten the other one, they spin around on them, and they either both go at it or one yields its hindquarters. So that's the most basic element in getting a horse under control, is that it will yield its guns to you. That is, his guns being the hindquarters. So if a horse is trying to swing his hindquarters at you, as this one is doing, he's basically saying, you know, I'm going to do what I want to do. If you came any closer, we'll kick at them, and we'll kick at you. And that's once again why we want to lunge horses on large circles like this, so we're out of the strike zone. When you see people lunging horses with these little sticks and they're running them around on 6-foot leads, well, that's the best way in the world to get yourself kicked in the kneecap. You always want to have the horse far enough away from you that you're out of the range of the hind legs. Same thing here, just not quite active enough, but you're almost there. If you will just shorten your rein a little bit, get a little closer to the horse and send him on a little bit more like you do there, that's what we're looking at. Only that needs to be much more consistent. As he does what he does there, you should be right there with the whip. So be quicker to send him forward underneath himself again as he starts to slow down. But you still need to ask for a little more than what you're getting here. But even what you're getting, he's starting to stretch. So that tells me that you're certainly on the right track. But we need to get that a little bit together. So before I would do any of this riding work, I would just do much more lunging and ground work to get it much more consistent. I mean, he's going kind of smoothly here for you, but he never really gets over his back in this mounted work. He's just kind of going with his neck straight out and not really engaging or getting deep enough. So I would spend more time doing the lunge work, get that really consistent, and then go back to riding, and you'll see how much easier this all is if the horse is doing it and is more consistent and starting to develop a better back and a stronger back before you get on and ride. Our theory is always that, you know, we want to spend as little time doing things wrong as we possibly can, which makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? So, you know, if your horse isn't over the back in the walk, as I say, that always my prerequisite to be able to ride a horse without lunging is that when I get on it, I can stretch it to the ground within a couple of minutes of getting on it. If I can't do that, it probably needs to be warmed up on the lunge line. So if you stick to that, you'll save yourself a lot of wasted rides in terms of, you know, in terms of training the horse. You know, just because you can get on them and ride them like this one doesn't necessarily mean that you should. This horse seems very calm and quiet about all things, but he's just not working with the right set of muscles. So if you really want to do this, you need to just start at the beginning and work more there. Once again, you see the horse in silhouette. You see how much the back is dropped there behind the saddle. And once again, you see how far the belly is distended down below him. He's not like pulling up through his abdominal wall. So really, for me, that tells me this horse isn't really ready to be ridden much yet, or at all, in my opinion. I would just go back to the groundwork until I get that really consistent. And once you get that consistent, all the rest of it, the horse will actually know what it is you're asking him to do, because as soon as, if he's not all the way there, and we get on, and your skills are limited as you're just trying to learn this stuff. Well, it's going to be very difficult once you put that weight on the back of the horse. You have to know some pretty advanced techniques to be able to get the horse to still come through its back and teach it that from on top. So much better at your level to just do the work in the walk and the trot and the canter on the lunge line, get that really over its back and stretching, and start to develop a little more swing in the horse. Because we see here, once again, he's just kind of going up hollow, and it just isn't really doing him any good. Looks like you're trying to do a little shoulder in or something there, but once again, because his legs are so far out behind in the mounted work here, it's not going to do you any good. In fact, it's harmful to the horse's legs. So we're better off just sticking to what the horse can do correctly. Yes, we can get on most horses and ride them for quite a long period of time, but that doesn't mean that we should, once again. Just because the horse is quiet enough to get on and ride doesn't mean it's strong enough to be ridden correctly and have it do its some good and not damage it. But we see with this horse right now how stiff the hocks are. There's almost no flexion in the hocks. We almost get a feeling of, it almost looks like, ouch, ouch, ouch with every step that he takes. There's a real hesitancy in the back legs. And that's what we want to see. That improved a great deal on the lunge line before you'd ever think about doing this from on top. And again, I tell you to go and take a look at our work in hand videos, because if you can get that work going on, it will help you a great deal with the lunging, is that it will help you to teach the horse to move its hindquarters away from you, which will make you able to get into the stretch more consistent and more quickly. So we're not just wasting time here. So yeah, he goes along quite quietly here, but once again, there's just not enough over his back to really make this have any real value, other than, for you to be on a horse and going around a ring. But that's kind of all that's really happening here. See how hesitant the step is, and once again, how straight the hind legs are. Now go back and look again at your own video of the walk, and even on the lunge line, the walk looked better than this. But here, you're on him, and his back is just dropped, and there's no rhythm in the walk whatsoever. It's just kind of slow, fast, slow, fast. Sometimes the hind legs are just completely falling out behind. Now, I like what you're doing here in terms of that you're bringing your hands up, which is a good thing to do. We never want to try to hold the horse's head down. That doesn't work at all. So when we're teaching a horse to stretch, when it raises its head up, we do raise our hands up along with it, rather than try to hold it down, which will only make the horse pull up even harder. But we don't take a lot of tension backwards against the mouth of the horse, hardly any at all. I mean, if anything, just slightly more than the weight of the rein. So we're never just hanging on or trying to pull the horse's head down, which never achieves anything at all. That's why we have so many broken horses today. So here, once again, we see the trot work is just about like the walk work is at the moment. It's very short strided. His back is very dropped. Even looks kind of irritated every now and then. Be sure and check your saddle fit if you haven't done that already, and just be sure there's nothing causing him any problems there in terms of blocking a shoulder, or too tight across the back, or too tight at the withers, or too narrow a tree. And if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend you watch my wife's video on saddle fitting. Yeah, here you see he starts to look a little irritated. Now that could be flies or something after him, but he doesn't look real happy when you're trying to send him on here a little bit, and he just goes more ewe-necked and hollower. So this all tells me that this horse is just not really ready to be ridden. You need to go back and just do that groundwork until that gets much more consistent. And there he's trotting a little more forward at least, and swinging a little bit, but at the same time it's really just hollow, and he's not really getting to a place that's going to help him. And just always remember, we want to do as little in the wrong way as possible. Because every time we ride a horse and just let it be upside down, well, that's what it thinks we want to do. So that's starting to swing a little better there, but once again, not enough that I would say you should just ride, you should do more riding. You just need to do more groundwork with this horse for a little while. Really get that stretch consistent. I said I would never get on and ride a horse until it has just calmed down and will just stretch consistently into the contact on the lunge line and keep going. There's a nice looking guy coming at us there. Decided to visit the camera person, obviously. And once again, we come back to this walk. We can see how just short the walk is. The hind legs look like they're stuck in mud, so to speak. You see that hesitancy before they pull off the ground. That's caused by the fact that the horse is hollow in the back, and so it's having a really hard time pulling its legs off the ground, because when its back is hollow, you're basically putting all that pressure backwards against the hips back there, which makes it very difficult for the hind leg to come forward. The same thing here in this trot. The horse is just very hollow. The back legs are just out behind it too much. So you get a couple of little moments there where it starts to get out forward. I just think if you would take the time to do this on the lunge line, and you will find you'll get on. I mean, you look like you have a good position. You have nice, quiet hands, so you are a good enough rider to do this. But since you're just trying to learn it at the same time, it's a little more difficult. And there he starts to swing a little bit forward. At least the trot here is a little more active than it was before. But what you will find is once you get this horse really consistent on the lunge, you'll just get on it and it will just stretch, and away you will go with much less difficulty. And of course, when we're asking for a stretch, all we're doing is just, when we're on the horse's back, when we can feel that we can send it underneath its body enough with our legs, then all we do is just keep that consistent soft contact, and as the horse wants to stretch forward, we just give that contact even more until it's just the weight of the rein. We never have a constant backwards pressure against our hands, or even a constant closed feeling of our hand against the horse's mouth. That's a little better trot there, but just not quite getting there yet. So my biggest advice to you is just have a couple of pretty good steps there, or at least it's swinging better. But if you'll spend the time to get the trot work going right on the lunge line, and then you come back to this, you're going to find that you have a lot better horse, and this whole thing will go much easier for you, and you won't be just taking steps that waste your time. So good work for your first one. I look forward to seeing the next one. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. See you next time.